Hello and welcome to the shop. This video is about the Porter Cable Dovetail Jig Series 4200. It's this jig with the attachments back there. I've been working with these now for several years. I've done hundreds of drawers. I've made changes to the jig because the way it came from the factory was too frustrating to use. I'm going to start out going through the way it came from the factory. I'm going to go through my first generation of improvements that made a big difference, and then I'm going to show the second generation of improvements that improve the quality but also the reliability of the way the dovetails come together. The problem with the jig is that it works fine, but it's not reliable. If you try cutting half-blind dovetails, especially in the harder woods like oak, it wiggles and the template comes out of alignment, and it's very hard to align the boards in the jig with the hold-down clamps because of the reference surfaces. So I'm going to take just a minute and do a zoom and show you some of the changes that I've made. The first change is I stopped using these workpiece guide blocks. They fit on the side here and they slide in, and you're supposed to use those to align your workpieces. But this surface is about 1 3/4 inch, and that's just not big enough to align drawer parts, especially larger drawer parts. That was the first biggest frustration in using the template. The second one is that these hold down screws and the adjustments underneath these brass pieces wiggle out of alignment. And especially with a deeper drawer, that's a real problem. The third one, and really hard to know, is the template can wiggle back and forth when you're using the router, and that makes your drawer parts not come together in the right alignment. So now what I'm going to do is show you the changes I made that had a lot of improvement a few years ago. The first change has to do with replacing this brass nut. This is a 3/8 by 16 bolt that's used to hold the template in place. And it's fine for what it is, but it's just threaded through this piece of steel. So what I've done is I added a nut that goes all the way back against the housing. And that locks the bolt in place because the bolt would vibrate out of alignment. The next thing I did was add 2 more nuts that I used as a jam nut to hold the back of the fork of the template in the right position. And I added a little bit of Loctite blue. It's the 242 removable thread lock. And then when you tighten these nuts up, with 9/16 wrenches, that gets to a much more reliable holding surface for the template. I still use the knob on the outside, and it works fine, and I check it as I go, but that was a big improvement. The second improvement is I took out these depth of cut adjustments. This piece and this piece on the template. And I added spacers and a block on the end. These are held in place with 5/16 by 1.5 machine screws that I drilled and tapped into the housing. I do that on both sides. It needs to be understood is that the template itself is not symmetrical. I'm going to try and show that. So the distance from the center of the template to this edge is not the same as the center of the template to the other edge. So when you flip the template to go between cutting the through dovetail pins and tails, you have to change these spacer blocks to hold this in place. But once that's done and this is held in place, it doesn't wiggle side to side as you use the router. That makes a big difference in the fit of the finished dovetails. The last thing I did was replace these guide blocks. It didn't work at all, with workpiece guides made out of plywood. I drilled and tapped holes on the top and the front, and I added these so that the work pieces can be held on both sides with what's 3 or 4 inches of reference surface on all of them. I started out, my first attempt, I used 1/4 inch bolts, and then I upgraded to 5/16 after those stripped. Something to keep in mind is that there's only so much space between the template and the back hold down. So to put your bolt holes in that narrow accessible area will save you from having to move the template or the hold down clamp every time you want to adjust the guide blocks. It ends up, as I make more and more drawers, the thing that takes the most time is getting the guide blocks set exactly so that when you flip the template to go between the pins and the tails, that the edge of the drawer sides and the drawer back line up perfectly. That's really hard to do because any distance is twice what the discrepancy is in the alignment. So this is set up for doing half blinds. You can see the blocks are in place here. This is the stop piece that goes on the outside of the template, and it holds the template from moving side to side. The bolts are in place behind the fork, and they're jammed together, and then when I tighten the nut up, that holds the template in place, and that keeps it from going front to back. And the pieces of plywood are in place, and they're used to keep the workplace from wiggling. That really holds both the template and the work piece is in place to the point where you don't get any vibrations, you don't get any misalignments. If you can get all this set up correctly, then it works as a system to give you a dovetail joint that works really well. The next setup I'll show you is what I'm doing now. It's an improvement over this in that the guides are made out of an angled piece of wood. So instead of 4 screws, you only need 2, and it aligns the edge of the top with the edge of the front in a way that keeps your work pieces aligned. Now, with half-blind dovetails, you need a 1/2 inch offset, and I do that by using a spacer on the top right-hand side and the front left-hand side. That offsets the pieces so that you get the right alignment after you've cut the half-blind dovetails. This is my current setup. These are the angled guides, so you only have the 2 screws. It's set up for cutting through tails at the moment, and this is a 7 1/4 inch wide board, so that when you put the template in, you can see the jam nuts on the front to back adjustment, hold that in place. These guide blocks hold the side to side adjustment in place. And the only thing left to do is get it set, and it's ready to go. And it's all set up. I've cut a set, and I want to show you that. These are dovetails. That's what they look like dry fitted. Everything's working great, very efficient. The next thing I'll do is set up and cut some dovetails. Now that I've introduced all the changes I've made to the jig, I want to show it set up and ready to cut dovetail joint. This top horizontal piece is a 5/8 inch thick drawer front. The vertical piece would be a 1/2 inch thick drawer side. They're both about 7 1/4 inches wide. They're exactly the same width, so they should align when it's over. You can see on the side I've got the block with the spacer. I have the jam nuts that hold the bolt against the housing and hold the knob and the fork in the right position. In here you can see the offset, the 1/2 inch offset, the template, the angled guides. I think that shows everything. The spacer and the block on the other side. And now I'll set the camera in the tripod and show you cutting the dovetails. That's how the cut looks like. I put the router in a block of wood. The block of wood has a hole in it so that I don't have to change the setup, or the bushing will get bouncing around on the countertop. Okay, let's get the pieces out of the jig and see how they fit together. little bit of cupping, but the fit is good. The ends cup a little bit, but the alignment is right, is very good. And so that's it. This is a pencil line, not a crack. I don't know if it'll focus, but with clamping, that's going to be fine. And the alignment front to back is really good. The alignment side to side is excellent, and it's all going to work out just fine in the clamps with gluing up. So let's set up and do a through dovetail on the other jig. So here is the jig set up for through dovetails. I've set it up to cut the tails first. You can tell that it's the tails first because the work piece is centered on the notches, the valleys, rather than the points. And I've got the routers all set up. I just want to do a quick walkthrough. Like with the half blind dovetails, you can see the block holding the template in place, the spacer, the jam nuts, the angled workpiece guide blocks, different spacers on this side to show that it's not symmetrical, and it's ready to go. The depth of cut on the router with the 7-degree dovetail bit is about 13-30 seconds, and I'll get set up and make the cut now. Now here's the part with through dovetails that takes the time. I have to take out the block and the spacer on both sides. I have to flip the template end for end and reinstall it, and then set up with the workpiece and cut the pins. And that's what I'm going to do now. This is going to take a few minutes, so I'm going to stop the camera and I'll be back in a minute. So I have the pin board in place. The template is set up for cutting pins. The scrap pieces in the back. I've changed the blocks, reinstalled the template. I have it about 1 1/8 inches. This space that I found from doing this before, that's a good dimension. I'm going to cut the pins, do a test fit, and that's it. So here's the pin board. It's very clean. Here's the tail board. Let's see if they fit. It's a little snug, but you can see real good fit. And that's the benefit. Got a little bit of cupping over here, but that's the benefit of adding all those features.